Welcome. In this What's New in V5 webinar highlight video, we'll be covering just a few of the topics that are further expanded upon in the full What's New in V5 Rhino webinar series. And this is the UI in version 5. One of the biggest changes that you'll notice if you're coming from an earlier version of Rhino is that the toolbars now have these tabs. These toolbars represent toolbar groups. And if you left-click over any toolbar tab, you can go into a different group. You can also use your scroll wheel on your mouse to travel between those different toolbar groups. If you're over a particular toolbar group that has associated tools in a sidebar, that sidebar will automatically pop up on the left side of the screen. And you can customize what sidebar comes up for any toolbar group in the properties for the toolbars. There are another group of tabs in V5 Rhino, and these are called panels. These panels are docked on the right side of the screen, and they are context-specific, such as object properties, or they are display-related in a lot of cases, such as materials, environments, the sun panel, ground plane panel. And if you'd like to display more than the default 4 panels, you can right-click over any panel header and put a checkbox next to the additional panel that you'd like to see. You can also use the panels drop-down menu at the top of the Rhino interface and just check which items, which panels you'd like to have visible in your V5 interface. And that will be remembered between sessions of Rhino. Another change happens down in the lower right-hand corner of V5 Rhino. The status bar now allows you to display a whole bunch of different types of information. You can right-click over that and put a check mark next to any piece of information that is important to you, and that list will get cycled through as you are modeling in Rhino. There's also a filter choice, and the filter is really helpful for determining what objects can be selected in the scene. Think of this as another way of locking all the objects that you don't want to inadvertently select. And there's another choice in the status bar for Rhino right next to record history. It's called Gumball, and if Gumball is enabled and you select an object, you'll see a manipulator object, and that manipulator object allows you to translate, rotate, and scale objects within the Rhino interface. You can also create objects with the Gumball, and that will be covered in further What's New in V5 webinars. You'll also notice that there is an updated and improved shaded mode in V5. So if you ever suffered from a darker, hard-to-view area in shaded mode in Rhino, that is greatly improved in version 5. There are many, many changes to the program itself, added features and changed features, additional options. But that is a quick overview for you of the V5 Rhino interface.
Hi, my name is Kyle Houchins, and I wanted to give you a quick preview of some of the new history features in V5. There's a video that has much more detail as into how this process actually works and how this object was actually created. But I wanted to show you very quickly what you can do with the new V5 history features. And you'll see that I have a very simple bracelet here, and it was built just using some very simple techniques. And if I pick the original input curves, try that again with that off. If I pick the original input curves, turn on the control points, pick, and edit, you'll notice that the object updates to reflect those changes. We can go one step further and modify additional input curves to create new and different details that we may not have originally expected. This allows you to explore your design and create on the fly with immediate feedback using nothing but the new V5 history features. Feel free to dig into the more detailed video if you want to see how this object was created and for a more in-depth look at the V5 history features. Thanks.
Welcome. My name is Brian James, and I'll be covering some highlights of editing and transformation improvements in version 5 of Rhino. One of the big changes in V5 Rhino is the inclusion of the gumball manipulator widget. So if you have gumball enabled at the bottom of the screen, then you can sub-object select, and with that gumball you can extrude geometry, scale it, and create new pieces. So it makes for a much more iterative workflow and is a very like-minded workflow if you come from a solid modeling background. Sub-object selection also works on edges, so I can grab multiple edges in unison, or I can drag a fence selection around multiple objects at once. I'll add a fillet to the top of this real quick just to show you another editing and transformation update in version 5 of Rhino. And I'll add one down here too. And that is the solid point on command. Solid point on is a pretty big deal in that you can turn on control points for polysurfaces. And those control points can then be moved. And you'll notice that I'll keep the fillet intact with that translation. And if I select just that one, I just move that whole edge at once. So you'll find these solid points at the intersections of surfaces within the polysurface. And F11 turns those off. Another update in the editing and transformation tools in version 5 of Rhino is the ability to shell polysurfaces. So on the right here I have a closed polysurface, and on the left I have the result after running the shell command on that polysurface. So you'll see it'll make the interior surface as well as cap that transition surface in between at the top. So with the additional ability to shell polysurfaces comes the added tool of offsetting a surface with a solid option. So if you have a polysurface, you can offset that as a solid, and that does something very similar to the shell command in V5. Hello and welcome. My name is Brian James, and this is a quick overview of the display and rendering improvements in version 5 of Rhino. Here I have a model and I am in rendered display mode. And the first thing that you'll notice is that rendered display mode now has shadows in the viewport. So any light object in the scene will cast shadows in the Rhino rendered viewport. I'm also using a whole bunch of different materials here that are courtesy from the default render content library that installs with V5 now, and you can access that through the libraries panel. There's some other panels that will help you in the display updates in V5, and those include the Sun panel, the Materials panel, the Environments panel, and the Ground Plane and Named Views panel. In this model, we have a few objects represented and features represented that are not actually modeled on the surface and solid geometry. These are custom render mesh updates in V5. For instance, there is no fillet along this edge. This is a custom edge softening mesh. The stitches on the band here are curve piping. This parting line in the housing is courtesy of shut lining. And the bumpiness that you see on this interior cloth is courtesy of the displacement tool. We're able to get high dynamic range reflections on materials, and those are embedded in basic Rhino environments, which is the RENV extension. And you can use the materials and environments panels to edit any of those library materials or environments. In the Sun panel, you have a Rhino Sun object as well as a skylight.
This is Mary Fouché. I want to do a quick overview of the large project improvements available in the What's New in Rhino webinar series. First and foremost, Rhino 5 installs in native 64-bit mode. This allows working with large files without running out of memory possible. There are lightweight extrusion objects to save significant memory and improve display speed. Meshes are now double precision. Display speed is improved by taking advantage of faster graphics cards, and there are major enhancements to block and work session management. Let's take a look at a few. In this model, I have two toolbars that are docked over on the side here, very helpful to do with Rhino 5. In the block toolbar, I have access to creating a block, inserting a block, and block manager, as well as a couple other commands that we will be talking about. I'm going to take a look at block manager first. And block manager opens with a preview of the blocks. There's also a count button, and you can select all of the blocks in your model. So take a look at block manager, a lot of new improvements there. Insert block has similar improvements. When we go to insert a block, we get a preview of it. When we insert a block, if it's a linked block, we get choices for link block. We have options to include active layer and reference layer. Reference layer brings us into some new layer improvements where the model name becomes the parent in a hierarchical layer structure. This both in linked blocks and in work session attachments. There are some additional new commands here that we'll be looking at in reference to blocks. One of them is called replace block. You can replace one block definition with another, and you can explode all levels of nested blocks in your block definition. Let's look at some of the layer improvements. With linked blocks and work session blocks, we see this hierarchical layer structure. In addition to that, I can right-click on the work session attachment and get access to work session management. So I can activate and detach and attach additional models to the work session. For additional details, you can watch the entire video on large project improvements included in the What's New in Rhino 5 webinar series. Hi, this is Mary Fouché, and I want to do a quick overview of 2D improvements. For all the details on 2D improvements in Rhino 5, you can watch the entire video on 2D improvements in the What's New in Rhino 5 webinar series. Primarily, in 2D improvements, we see more control over annotation display and annotation scaling. We also see numerous improvements with layer control, layout, and in printing. I want to take a look at a few of these. To start out, let's take a look at layer improvements. If you compare these two details, I can double-click on this one, and in the layer control dialog box, I can turn layers on and off in that detail. Layer has significant improvements here with right-click menus and on filters and view options. In view, I'm going to look at only the layer details here to show you that we have control in the layer manager over layer, display, color, line weight, and line type per detail. If I pick on this detail and make it active, you can see that floor 1 is now turned off, and all of the layers for floor 1 are not referenced in that detail. I'm going to double click back out to the layout, and we can double click on that title block and begin in-place editing, which is another improvement for blocks. In the title block, we don't just have text, we have text fields. And there are a number of places here in the title block where we use text fields: date, title of the layout, page number, and total number of pages. This is very powerful because instead of being static text, I can now move to other layouts and watch the fields update. That's a significant time savings with Rhino 5. Let's take a look at text improvements. If I select the text object, text has justification options, it has scaling options, and masking. I want to open up another model, so I'm going to go up here to About Rhinoceros and open up a model called First Floor. In First Floor, I want to point out that it's using annotation scaling, and with this feature you see two details at different scales, but the text, dimension, and hatching look identical. In this layout, we have two details at different scales. In the detail, you can see that the dimension in both details appears to be displayed at the same size. The text is also the same size, and the hatch scaling is identical. This is because of a new feature called annotation scale. And in the options dialog box, you can turn on annotation scale per model. When annotation scale is on, Rhino handles the scaling of annotation objects so that they appear the one-to-one size that they are going to be plotted. This is a very powerful feature of Rhino 5. Let's look at some additional improvements. These improvements are related to dimensioning. So I want to jump into a model that we have some dimensions created for you, and then I want to just take a brief look at the plotting improvements. So in this model, we have dimensions that were created with a new chain dimension option. Off the drafting tab, if I select linear dimension, you can see one of the new options here called continue. If you pick on that and say continue equals yes, you'll create a whole new set of chain dimensions. And then the object option that will allow you to pick on an object and create a dimension from endpoint to endpoint. Additional new options here in Rhino 5, dimension area, okay, and curve length. Also have improvements here to the dimension object for masking, and a general improvement to 2D is move to front, send to back, and other display order improvements. Okay, so up here off the drafting tab, you'll find display order improvements. And hatching has also been improved. If we select the hatch object, we have a new option called Set Base that will allow you to pick the origin from where the hatch is generated. All of the annotation objects, text, dimensions, and hatching have a property for matching the properties of other annotation objects. Okay, so we'll see match off of text, we'll see match off of dimension, okay, and also off of hatch. If I go over to standard here and pick print, Rhino allows for multiple layout printing. I can print all the layouts, or I can select from specific layouts to print and the preview supports multiple sheets. So those are just some improvements that we see here in Rhino 5. Take a look at the full version of the video on 2D improvements in the What's New in Rhino 5 webinar series.
My name is Dale Fugier, and I want to give you an idea of what's new with the Zoo for Rhino 5.0. The Zoo is a network license manager. What it does is allow you to share licenses amongst different copies of Rhino on your network. The reason that you might want to use a Zoo server is if you had more users or potential users of Rhino than you did have licenses of Rhino. The Zoo runs as a service on any Windows computer. You install the Zoo, you add your Rhino licenses to the Zoo, and then you install Rhino as a network node, and when you run Rhino, it obtains its runtime license from the Zoo as opposed to just loading it from disk. The Zoo, available for Rhino 4.0 and previous versions of Rhino, is fairly old technology. It was written back in the days when Novell NetWare was the dominant LAN operating system, and thus it uses a fairly old network protocol called NetBIOS. NetBIOS tends to be something that most network administrators frown upon because they consider it a security hole in their firewall system. And then just the fact that NetBIOS requires a different name service other than what most people are using. A lot of companies just don't want to route NetBIOS on their network. So for Rhino 5, we've completely started from scratch with the Zoo. It's a brand new product. We don't use any of the old code. We use a very commonly used port. Most people use it for web browsing. It's TCP port 80. It routes very easily. It's secure enough where administrators don't have any problem opening it on firewalls. It makes for Rhino 5 working in a large network that has maybe a complicated WAN system or even VPNs very well. It's very easy to install, very easy to configure, and we're going to find that our customers have fewer problems deploying the new Zoo with Rhino 5 than they had with the previous version. What's also new with Zoo 5.0 is the ability for third-party developers to create their own plugins for the Zoo. Prior to Zoo 5.0, the only products supported by the Zoo were those written by Robert McNeil and Associates. Now, going forward, you'll see other third-party products starting to support the Zoo, which will make it easier for companies to not have to have just a whole bunch of different network license managers running around their company. Should make it easier to deploy products. For more information on what's new with the Zoo, see all the new videos that are available on our website.